of our originals and canvas creators around the world have started building their own teams or are working as writer and artist partners to produce their series. Especially if you're a writer in the group, you may be interested in publishing your own series with a team. Whether you're an artist, a writer, or both, anyone can tell their story with Webtoon, but you don't have to do it alone. And this all reflects the heart of our global platforms, the limitless potential of you, your series, and your community. But again, your community starts with your story. Knowing how to develop a clear story can help you inspire both readers and potential collaborators. We're joined by a producer and writer whose potential is truly limitless, the great Brandon Chin, for a discussion on how to write and produce webcomics. Brandon is the creator of Webtoon original series Just a Goblin and Samurai no Tora, and is joining us to go in depth into their process for writing and producing series for Webtoon. He has an awesome expert approach to writing, script writing, character development, and world building, and also leads teams of assistants to collaboratively produce his written series. Joining him today is his editor, Eric Kazura. As an editor, Eric provides professional and creative support as Brandon shares his multiple series with readers around the world. And please join me to celebrate our guests as I turn the stage over to them.
How to write and produce webcomics with me and Eric and the Webtoon team. Eric, do you want to do a little intro on yourself as well? Because I got a big boost intro, but
No, yeah. It won't be as gas as yours. But I think Kirsten still did me wonderful justice. I'm Eric. I'm an editor here at Webtoon. Lucky enough to work with creators like Brandon on a bunch of different series. Outside of that, I don't want to take up too much time. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So I
Awesome.
think we can kick right into it.
Gotcha. So, I'll run through, because a lot of people always wonder what the one track is to becoming a producer or a writer in the Webtoon space. And so I thought I'd just go through real quick how I got to where I am today. Because there's no one right way, I guess, to go into Webtoons full time, right? So my origin story is kind of that I started off as a novelist, published my first novel when I was around 17 years old, and then was a little not confident in that being a career path. So I went to finance and tech while writing on the side, and eventually was able to break into an American comics and work on manga. And that was my first kind of delve into visual storytelling. And then while I was doing a competition in Japan, got the opportunity to get a webcomic serialization. And then eventually from there, hopped over to Webtoon. And now I'm doing a ton of stuff at Webtoon, which is very exciting. And today we're going to be talking about how do we even do all this stuff? What's my process? And my process is not the right process. But maybe we can go through this really quick, because if you're here, I realized I made this slide and I was if you're here, you probably know what Webtoons are. But to go through it really quickly, summarize: vertical scroll, typically shorter bite-sized chapters when you compare them to a lot of other comic mediums like traditional manga, Western comics, that kind of stuff. They're serialized and colored. And so this is kind of today's little agenda that we're going to be running through. Concept development and hiring, which is working with artists. Pitching, which Eric knows a lot about, and so I'll be leaning on you pretty heavily for that. Scripting, storyboarding, inks, colors, lettering, effects, and then the marketing stuff. So, which everyone always hops over the marketing stuff, but I think, guys, by the end of today's discussion, hopefully you will be paying more attention to marketing, because it's also super important. Eric, anything to add before I jump in?
Nah, I think we're ready to hop in. I got your back on the pitching section. We'll chat
Awesome.
on it. It'll be a good.
All right, guys. So concept development. The biggest thing about making a Webtoon is before you can do anything, you have to think about what is the great idea that you're going to be working with, especially if you're going to be doing a serialization, right? You're going to be dedicating a lot of your time into this one concept. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about not necessarily what makes a good concept, but some advice on how to develop a concept that you're comfortable with working on for the long term. And so some advice I would give that's pretty general, but pretty useful, in my opinion, is it's a lot easier to start off with a really small concept then to expand, and then to start with a really big concept. So you can start small and then go big over the period of time, right? Because what I do see from a lot of, and Eric, let me know if you do this as well, you probably review a lot more pitches than I do. I typically see a lot of scenarios where like newer creators might start off with a concept that's like Lord of the Rings scale, like too big to chew. Like, how am I gonna sell this concept in the first 3 or so episodes, right? It's like super hard because some of the concepts are like really too big to chew at the beginning. Have you ever seen that, Eric? Have you seen that pretty often?
Plenty of times, yeah, because there's like there's so many kind of like wonderful worlds you can hear someone build, and especially in a pitch. And sometimes it can feel, even if you're the one coming up with the pitch, it can you can almost make yourself feel a bit overwhelmed if you have these like really grandiose and exciting ideas, but needing to kind of like distill it down to kind of like a digestible way where you can like, that's why there's the concept of the elevator pitch. You want to be able to kind of like pitch it to someone as quickly as you can and as concisely as you can. And sometimes some of those bigger concepts are harder to get across, which is why I think part of what Brandon's getting on about, this kind of starting small. Sometimes that starting small is your main character, making them engaging and then putting them in this world that can expand and make that, see how that can kind of be the engaging start point. But yeah, totally see this a bunch.
Exactly. And I think something that is really important, and this is something that we'll also talk about in the pitching stage, is like whether or not you're able to tell like your general concept in a log line. If it's really hard to tell your general concept in a log line, then you're probably like either not focused, the concept is not that focused and there's just too much going on, or like, I don't know. I would just say like, make sure that you can definitely distill your concept down into like a log line. I actually start with a log line first, build out into a summary, and then expand from there. Just what I do. And I find it to be a very useful strategy. So definitely a process to consider. I would also say when you're developing your concept, like make sure that you're asking yourself the really big questions, right? One, is your concept unique? Is it marketable? I think the biggest thing is like ultimately thinking about whether or not in the current marketplace, is there something that's similar to yours? And if so, why would someone read your concept and how you're executing it more than this other project, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. If you can market yourself in that way, where you feel unique, there's still a marketplace for it. I think that's pretty important. And when you're considering what kind of concept to try out. A really big question also is like, because I'm a writer, so I don't do the art myself. I'm just a writer producer. The most I will ever do is like a stick figure storyboard drawing. But for the most part, I don't actually draw. So I typically partner with artists to work on all the projects. So Just a Goblin has Inu Pen, Samurai no Tora has my friend Jose. And a big question I have is people ask me is like, how do you find the artists and how do you find the right fit for those people? I would say like finding an artist is like finding a girlfriend or boyfriend. It's like the right fit. You got to go through a lot. On the surface level, sometimes like you see someone's art style and I think it's really awesome. But that artist, you might check out Instagram and be like, wow, this artist is so good. I would love for them to draw my stuff. However, if there's a problem with them being able to serialize, right? Or whether or not they can't do sequential panels very well, like that's typically a thing that I've noticed can be an issue. So I think it's a matter of like talking to people, finding people's portfolios on social media is like usually the first step. It's like, wow, I can find your social media. I know, what your art looks like. Okay, let's talk to you to see, can you serialize? Can you do sequential panels? Can you deliver in a reasonable like timeline, that kind of stuff? Are you fun to work with, right? So finding out the right fit is something that kind of has to go over time. The way I used to test people is I used to literally do like manga competitions with artists, which are typically like one shots. So one shot being like 20 pages or so. And I used to test out the dynamic between me and an artist through one shots. And by doing the one shot, it's just like a one and done. and then you find out if you guys are in it for the long run. So that's a good way to test things out if you have the means to do one shots. In terms of hiring people, I would say like a lot of people jump over this stuff, but making sure that you're covered on the legal side, which is stuff like NDA, stuff like collaboration agreements, stuff like if you're not sharing IP, like hiring agreements, right? If you're hiring a colorist, which we'll get into later, you want to make sure that you're covered on the legal side. Get a lawyer to do it, please. Don't try and write a contract yourself. It's not the move, trust me, as someone who attempted that and was like, at one point I stopped and I was like, what am I doing? I didn't go to law school. I don't know what I'm doing. So don't try and write your own contracts, get a lawyer. So we're going to hop into pitching, which is a big part of the Webtoon process, and any process in any form of entertainment you do with any sort of collaborative publisher. And the main things being like log lines, summary, character sheets, and then like the different art styles and like what kind of episode stuff. So we talked a little bit about log line. Basically, if you didn't know what a log line is, it's like 1 or 2 sentences that can really sell, like kind of like Eric said, like an elevator pitch. Really sell your project in 1 to 2 sentences. Summary, and maybe Eric can weigh in here. I typically do summaries in terms of like, I'm doing a paragraph. It's kind of like the blurb that you would read on the back of a book, except it gives more away because I'm telling the publisher what it is. Eric, can you give some thoughts or even like some advice on the summary piece?
Yeah, totally. Because I think there's also a helpful distinction between kind of just like a summary, as you've mentioned it, and then sometimes kind of like a series outline. You know, a summary is exactly as kind of Brandon put it. You know, it's the expanded version, so to speak, of the log line. So you get the key details from the log line, the thing that hooks the people in initially, like, oh, this sounds interesting. And then the summary is, you know, it goes into a bit more detail, kind of like at least giving you the key details of what this character's kind of journey will be through the story. And any kind of like big world events are really helpful too, or like, you know, kind of like paint at least a little bit of what this world is going to be and how this character you're introducing to us is kind of going to, you know, grow or progress through this journey. And then, you know, the next evolution of that breakdown, which isn't, you know, perhaps as well, you know what? I think it is kind of necessary. Like, I think giving a clear idea to us, and even to yourself, of like what your story is going to be. Like, so we have, Brandon has character sheets in here, which I think is great because, one, it gives a visual of what the main characters and supporting cast are going to look like, but 2, it also gives you a chance to expand upon what their motivations are going to be, what their goals are going to be, what, you know, set up what their stasis is, what their status quo is, so we know kind of at least an idea of what to expect of what their character's journey is going to be. We now have an idea of kind of potential arcs or kind of the trajectory that they're going to go through. So summary is really key to give us an idea of what do you, the writer and the creator, have in mind for the story. What is the type of story you want to tell? What is the genre? What's the, you know, are you setting us up for an isekai? Are you setting us up for a battle shonen? Are you setting us up for romance? All these kind of things you can explore and give a bit more detail in kind of the summary section, so we have an idea of what to expect with your pitch, and then we can kind of delve into even more details.
Yeah, agreed. I think, the summary, character sheets are really important also for, I think it's a good exercise in general, just for when you're developing your story. Like, characters, guys, I know a lot of people are like, story is the most important. In my opinion, characters are the most important, because you actually have a lot of Webtoon Canvas concepts that are completely character driven. Arguably, they don't have a story. They're just like completely character driven. There's a lot of comics out there, even like Calvin and Hobbes and stuff, that are just like ultimately very character driven concepts, right? So I think character in any sort of story that's serialized especially is the most important thing. And then it's like story comes like a little bit after that, right? But so I'd say like, really take your time with the character sheets. Make sure that you really get to know your characters. And then also when you're pitching, make sure that you are really coherent in the way you deliver like your vision for those characters. I think the hardest thing is for a lot of people who are pitching for the first time is clarity. I think, and Eric, maybe you can weigh in a little bit on this. Like, I feel like from some pitches that I've seen, is a lot of people might have a certain vision and maybe it's just not clear on the pitch, like, hey, this is like my vision, or, you know, maybe there's a long paragraph and it's not really telling me like in clear terms, like what's actually happening. If you can't tell the editor or tell the publisher what your vision is, then, you know, they might misinterpret, and it's really get on board if they have no idea what what the concept is, right? Okay, and then I would say like one thing that I find for Webtoon's pitch process, Webtoon really cares about this, and it makes sense, is the episode 1, which is ultimately the most important episode, because a lot of us will do this, me included. You'll read the first episode. If you're not hooked, you're done, right? Maybe the first 3. If not, you're hooked, you're done. So knowing how to write that first episode, making sure that you convey all the things that you want to do, which ultimately is 1, like introducing your character, introducing the story, introducing the setting, introducing the general concept of those themes that you want to get in, all in your first episode, can be a very hard task. And then you have to leave it on a cliffhanger, and then you have to, you know, have a good hook at the beginning. It's a tough task, but I think if you guys can take the time to make sure that you have that first episode, you know, nailed down on the pitch process, like Webtoon likes to see, like that you guys, that the first episode is a solid one. And then also because, you know, for originals, typically episodes launch with the first 3, and then, you know, the next 3 are on Fast Pass, right? So having the first 6 episodes be really solid in your story is also really important. And that's a good part of the pitch process also. And then also, like, does the art style that you've chosen for your partner or yourself match the concept that you're trying to sell, right? Because if you're selling a romance story and you're doing like a bad story with a lot of like ripped guys, like, I don't, you know, if it doesn't match, it doesn't match, you know? So I would say, like, make sure that the art style is matching the concept that you're trying to pitch. I think that's probably a super important thing. Eric, anything to add on pitching?
I think you covered it really well, because I also think a lot of the stuff you touched on pitching also came in the previous conversation where we're talking about the kind of conceptual stage where, you know, you're coming up with these ideas, because you mentioned this idea of like feeling too big, and I love world building. I adore world building, in fact. Like, if you're painting me this beautiful picture of a world that's 1 part Miyazaki Wonderland, 1 part Big Hero 6's San Francisco with like the threat of kaijus or something, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, I'm in. But again, just stressing Brandon's point about character being really, really important. Like, you've painted this beautiful, you know, world, but what we're really here for, and what I'm here for, and what I'm all in for, is hearing about the character and needing to know who I'm going to want to follow, being the main character, and who's going to be driving us through that. So again, like, I just want to highlight that portion again. And Brandon's right, you know, like, hey, we're gluttons for a killer first episode. But I think that can be said for a lot of different mediums. But again, it's stuff that, like, it's us wanting to see how you would go about it. So again, like, you know, part of these things become part of the process. So, you know, like, let's say this is, you know, take Just a Goblin, for example. You know, Brandon pitches this idea for a first episode and say, you know, we're like, oh, this is great. You know, he's introducing these stellar concepts, great hook. It's still stuff that, like, you know, we can chat about. So I do want to add, just like, yes, put some strength and emphasis into it, but don't let that kind of become like a debilitating factor of like, oh, like, don't be too afraid, you know, but like put all the effort you can into it. But don't also be too afraid to kind of like release it and be like, this is my first episode. Because that's the, you know, that's the key part of it, is doing it and having, like, you know, letting other people know your vision. But no, I think you covered pitching great.
Awesome. And I guys, I would say that this idea for all this information regarding pitching, you know, I would say it crosses a lot of different mediums of storytelling, including like animation and all that stuff, comics, novels, all that stuff. This can kind of apply to everything. Okay, so taking the time to get it right. So this is some examples of Samurai no Tora where we did a lot of development stuff. This is like the art style we tried to do. We were also looking at some different hairstyles. We didn't go with any. I don't think we went with any of these. Ryu, who was our secondary main character, used to have blonde hair. Like we tried all these different expressions to try and right, different poses to do exploratory stuff. Take your time to get the characters right, guys. Take the time to get the exploration right so that when you're pitching, you have a clear idea on what your vision is. And then you just want to bring Webtoon in for the ride. Like, this is the vision. It's flexible, but this is what we like. We did some exploration. None of these look like they match the character, right? And then it's like, this is the one we landed on, etc. Doing exploration, taking the time to don't just rush into the pitch. Make sure that you take the time for the exploration phase. I'm not sure if I ever showed you these, but that's just pretty. This is some exploration stuff that
I think I've seen some of these, but some of them are certainly new. Yeah, but I like it. I dig the. There's some hairstyles in here. Maybe we'll revisit. We'll introduce a new character with. We'll get that C haircut in there. I like that spike.
I know she looks like Zapdos from Pokemon. Like. Okay, now here's the fun part, scripting, which ultimately, guys, there's no right or way wrong to script. I will be showing you guys how I script. I'm told that this is unconventional, which means that not a lot of people do it this way. Eric probably has seen more scripts than me, so maybe he can tell you a little bit how other people script, but this is how I script. I have seen people do how screenwriting scripts, which ultimately leave it up to the artist to convey the panels however they want. I like to detail exactly what's happening in the panel, what kind of view is happening, and also the distance from the reader. I'll give an example here. This is a view from Tomoe, who's the main perspective. She's showing this character running on the wall. He's focused and he's trying to slash towards the reader. We have this reference perspective here, which is another series that I've done. And so this is how it turned out. The artist is obviously free to interpret this however they want. And usually you can see in the storyboarding phase pretty early on how that's interpreted. I find this very useful because I'm a very visual storyteller. I pretty much imagine how everything would turn out in my mind before as I'm writing it. So this is a process that works really well for me. I've also seen other writers who would just say Hiruto running on wall towards reader. Or towards, I don't know, maybe that's too much. Hiruto runs on wall to attack character. So some people are a lot more, less detail, and they leave it up to the artist to interpret it. The reason I include the detail is also because not necessarily the artist has to follow it to a T. It's to give them an idea for how I envision it, because then that plays into how the panels are laid out and all that stuff, which can be very helpful for an artist. But personally, when I work with artists, I tell them up front, hey, this is more of a guideline. It's great if you decide to use it. And I show that right here, medium shot front view of Nog. And then Inu, who's the artist, decided to change the direction to make it a little bit more dynamic. So it's like a 3/4 front view, and we're going from a lower angle, that kind of thing. So artists interpret it however they want. This is kind of to just give them guidance so that when they see it, they know exactly the vision. Eric, or you probably work with a lot of creators who do scripting differently. What have you seen, I guess, in the space that you think is interesting or perhaps useful to tell everyone today?
Yeah, so obviously working with Brandon, I've seen dozens of his scripts. So I like this format. Of course, as he introduced at the beginning, there's tons of different ways. There's no one right way. He's right. Some people will use Final Draft and write scripts kind of in the format that you'd see for, film or TV. Other people will just use Word documents with, either dashes or arrows, different symbols to kind of represent possible screen direction or dialogue. So ultimately, I think the most helpful thing to do is just communicate with your artist and your team, find out which method is most conducive to them. This way is nice because, like Brandon said, it's clear. It gives an idea of what he has in mind, but it leaves the floor open for interpretation and still lets the artist kind of have the freedom to explore, the dynamism of their panels or have a conversation about, this could be a potential shift from an editorial perspective. Things like this are nice because it gives me that initial kind of, the read through, so I can get an idea for how the episode's going to flow, the tension that's going to be present, where we're going to end on a hook. And I have kind of like the closest thing to a visual idea of what this is going to be until we get to, of course, the next stage, storyboarding, where I actually get to see some visuals.
Yeah, I will say a weakness of the screenwriting approach is that you won't see how it implements until you see the actual storyboard. In addition to that, it's hard for you to, like, when you're writing the actual, like, I don't know, like narration or any of that, certain things that only work in the Webtoon format. And so you have to like keep that in mind, like when you're doing the actual Webtoon, like certain panels will build up to other panels. When you're doing like a narration, maybe you're doing like some kind of, rain petals or petals are flowing down the panel and I want narration there. Like that's all stuff that you would want to like plan out. And I feel like when you're doing screenwriting stuff, it's a lot harder to visualize that and direct that until you reach the storyboard phase. So, and then when you reach the storyboard phase, you're kind of surprised, right? And if you're surprised and you have to make edits later, that can be a kind of a struggle in the serialization process. But that's why I do it this way. So, but guys, no right or wrong answer. And so this is how the storyboards typically will look. This is from 4 different series, guys. So you're getting a sneak peek at something that I won't say what it is, but these are from 4 different series. This one's from Just the Goblin. So storyboards can be are ultimately like what's almost like the skeleton of what the actual chapter is going to look like. So I'd say like the most of the effort in terms of composition of panels, in terms of composition of the episode, should go into the storyboard because you want to make sure that the skeleton's right before you actually start throwing meat on the bones, right? So Just the Goblin, like literally here we have like just circles. Like it's just very simple. We just like, but we know exactly what's happening. You have multiple characters here. They're like, taking these poses and they're saying all these things and they're very excited, right? That's the general composition. You can read this and know exactly what's going on. This is from Samurai no Tora, which is similar thing. A little bit more detail. You can kind of see like the hair here, kind of see like the bodies. Still like very sketchy, but you can kind of tell what's going on. This is a robot, and yeah, you can tell that it's a person with a sword sitting on another person. This is from another series. You can also tell a little bit more detailed also, but you can also tell exactly what's going on. So I think, again, for storyboards, the most important thing is clarity. This is probably the most detailed a storyboard's going to get, which is like, you just like would trace over this when you're inking this thing, you just trace over this, right? So I'd say like it can go from this level of storyboarding, which is relatively quick, to like the more, cleaner storyboards. And it's all up to you on how you want to do it. The most important thing, again, if you can tell like what it looks like, that's super important because you ultimately want to make all the decisions regarding planning out how the episode works, all that jazz in the storyboard phase. Eric, anything to add to that?
No, just echoing, like, these are 4 projects that are just, ones that Brandon's working on. So, with other creators I work on, it spreads the gamut. So he's really right. Like the best thing and most important thing is kind of making sure, at base, it's clear enough to kind of interpret, because the storyboard stage is really important because it's the one where I typically kind of inject the most kind of like editorial input, because I now have kind of a visual attached to potential scripts. But again, all 4 of these and even beyond either direction, even some slightly less detail than the Just the Goblin one all the way to the left there. It's still a big range of kind of what's possible. But yeah, these are all great examples, some of which I'm very excited for people to check out in the future.
Yeah, I should have put some of my guys. So when I used to do like manga, and sometimes when I do actually for this series, because the artist and I used to do manga, I used to storyboard before we did the manga. So it would look kind of like this, except it would be even worse. I would be unable to draw certain perspectives. So I would just be like a note, like it's supposed to be in this perspective, because I'm physically inept and I cannot draw it in this perspective because I don't know how. So that's also something you guys can do. Like you just leave notes on your storyboards. That's also fine. Like it's just for the behind the scenes team. Man,
I'm grateful you didn't put any of my terrible drawings in there.
I wish I should have
sometimes.
had like a little meme slide in there. Yeah.
No, thank goodness you saved me the embarrassment.
Now here's inking, coloring, and lettering, which is kind of like the next process after storyboarding. And here's one panel where it's from Samurai no Tora. This is what the storyboard looks like. You don't even need to draw the expressions really, just kind of like the general composition of the page. Inking, we kind of see exactly what everything's looking like without the colors. Talking a little bit about 3D assets here, guys. 3D assets are really useful, especially for backgrounds. Some people think it's cheating. It's not cheating. It's literally a way to save you time so that you can actually put out your episode, right? So because if you're drawing all your backgrounds, it's a lot of extra work. There's actually these assets out there in libraries like Clip Studio Paint, etc., can help you with your process. So again, like even if you just import the background, you can do some coloring and some effects over it to make it look a little bit cleaner in the final version. So I'd say 3D assets, guys, for stuff that is either really detailed, stuff like intricate weapons. Like some people do really crazy looking weapons. You can do a 3D asset for that. Then you just drag and drop when you're actually doing the series. Or backgrounds are typically the easiest one. I would say try and hold off on making your characters like super 3D. Like I don't think people it's fine in animation so far, but like for Webtoon, I haven't seen that it works that great. Yeah, so inks, colors, and lettering are also some of the things that I think are the sourceable steps. So what does that mean? When you storyboard something, and if your artist is having trouble like meeting the deadline for like a week-to-week basis, you could actually hire someone to like that has a similar like style to ink over their storyboard and get it to this phase. And then anyone can hire to then take this phase and color it to get to this phase. In my opinion, it's always useful to hire a colorer because if you're serializing weekly, it can be extremely difficult for an artist to storyboard, ink, and color, let's say 50 or 60 panels a week. That's like a lot of work. So typically like the most I will ever, partner with an artist on, a lead artist, will be storyboard and inking. And then I'll always outsource the coloring personally, just because I would like from the artist to see their families. That's a joke. Eric, any thoughts on this?
I think two kind of key things that you touch on is, I know you reference kind of like assets. That I think optimization is its own conversation, finding ways to make life as easy as possible in terms of like on everyone's, everyone's plate, like especially like you mentioned, the artists, finding ways to kind of, if you're aiming for weekly serialization, finding ways to fine tune the process, finding ways to, like you said, it's not cheating, it's making time, because you need to be the most efficient you can be with whatever time you're given. So finding, there's a ton of resources out there, whether it be fellow Canvas creators, originals creators, there's a ton of great advice out there. And I know we continue to plug some good ones. But just keep your eye out for optimizations, talk to other creators, see what works for them, find resources that they like, see if it's something that you can fit into your process and it's something that you enjoy. But yeah, agreed. It's again, we have great communities out there who are always looking to, potentially work on another project.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole part about building a team, building a team versus trying to do everything by yourself. It really does help like alleviate a lot of the stress of the week-to-week basis, right? Because ultimately a lot of people come up to me and they're like, how are you doing like 8 series, Brandon? And I'm like, first off, I have no idea. Second off, it's because I have great teammates, right? Don't just say like it's Brandon's series. I work on a bunch of series with a lot of people, and that's what makes it all possible, right? Is like working with people who can do things that obviously I can't do, and then also people who, just delegating different tasks to different people that are good at those things. I think that's the biggest part about one, being a producer, 2, being a writer that wants to work on multiple ideas, and then 3, also like building a team, right? And that ties all the way back to get everyone contracts, guys. So when you're doing any of this stuff, you're getting them all contracts at all. If you have someone doing every one of these steps, getting everyone contract stuff, that's super important. I feel like a lot of creatives skip out on that. And so that's kind of like the overall process, right? You build a concept, you pitch it, you script it, then you storyboard it, then you ink, color, letter, and then once you're published, you want to market. And so a lot of people, I'm just going to take a little like 5 minutes just to tell you guys about why marketing is super important. I would say marketing is on par with the amount of importance that it takes to actually make the project, which is a pretty bold thing. But ultimately, you want people to be reading your stuff, right? I put stuff on Canvas. It's a tough battle, right? There's a lot of people putting stuff on Canvas. There's a lot of people putting stuff out into the universe. And how is it that you are going to make yourself stand out amongst all those people? It's taking the time to put your work out into the world, which ultimately can be a scary thing. Putting it on social media. Some people are not really, into social media. Some people are not into, posting ads or doing whatever it is or putting their work out there. But if you're pressing publish on your Webtoon every single week, or you're pressing publish on your Webtoon Canvas title every single month or whatever cadence, then you're already putting something out there, and you probably want people to be reading it. So I think don't slack on the marketing. Something that I've done over the many years is like building a social media presence. A lot of creatives I know don't even need to show their face. I show my face because I don't mind. But there's ways to market your projects without doing any of that. You can literally just post panels of your project, and there's bound to be people, online and stuff that are going to be interested and will check it out. And even if you take the extra 5 minutes every single day to post about it and put your work out there, you might get 5 people from doing 1 post or 2 posts, but that is 5 more people than you had before, and that is something, right? So I'd say and then you just keep doing it. Over the course of many years, you can build up like a pretty big empire. So I'd say, guys, don't slack on marketing. If that's one thing to take away. I know that a lot of people are not doing enough of as creatives, and I want to put that message out there. So then I leave it open for questions.
Yeah, I know we've gotten a couple in the chat. I see that Kirsten has answered a few, but yeah, as Kirsten put it, Mina, there aren't necessarily requirements to what facilitates a Canvas series, in terms of requirements, what it needs to become an original, especially in terms of kind of episode length, because there are slice of life comics out there which are anywhere from 4 to 20 panels. There are I will say, typically with something a bit more narratively driven, it is a bit just naturally longer in terms of panel count, just because progressing the story and kind of having some key character moments in there usually just pushes things. But again, a comedy series that's 4 panels isn't unheard of. There's a series on the platform, I believe, called Ingrid and the Plague Doctor, which is a shorter 4 to 6 panel series. Blue Chair, a really long running series on the platform, is generally a bit shorter. So yeah, there is no length. I think, as Kirsten put it, 4 to 140 panels per episode. I know 140 is a lot, but hey,
140.
some people are just content creating robots, and they are just able to churn out insane amounts, hopefully healthily, because again, as Brandon said, these artists need to spend time with their families. But we have an incredible array of talented folks. But I hope that answers your question. There isn't, necessarily a panel minimum that if it doesn't hit, editors are like, no.
I have a question. Lots of Canvas titles out there. How do you guys find the ones that you're interested in? Because there's so many. What is behind the scenes? What is the process looking like? I have no idea. I can't imagine. There's thousands of them. There's only X amount of you guys. How do you divide and conquer?
You want our trade secrets? No, it's honestly, it's one of, there are several favorite parts of the job for me, but it is just going into the Canvas site and checking series out, seeing which ones, checking out. It ranges from I check things out just that hit my own personal taste. I check out ones that I kind of like are being recommended to me, that be through, the wonderful Canvas team who kind of plugs and pushes certain series and, getting them out to you, the wonderful readers and fellow creators, but also it gives me an idea of things to go look through. So I'll just hop on to the Canvas portion of the platform, check them out. If it's something that I like and it's early in the stages, I'll just kind of like, mark it as like, oh, come back. Like, this is fun. Like, this is the first episode of it, but I'm interested to see more. But again, thankfully, we do have a team of folks out here. So again, like, the Canvas team is great at highlighting creators who have, been consistent and putting out great work. Our internal editorial teams take a look at things. Sometimes it's, because the team I'm on specifically looks at action. So a lot of times I'll be just perusing through the action section of Canvas just to kind of check things out, get a gut check to see what people are creating and what people are checking out.
Are most comics weekly? I see one that says that. Are most comics weekly, Eric?
There are the overwhelming variety of them are weekly, but we have some that post twice a week. There's even some that post 3 times a week. Again, those are typically the slice of life genre, comedy genre that tend to hit that, more than just weekly cadence. I see Kirsten in here. I'll let her take things over.
Thank you. I just popped in to help with questions. Brandon, Eric, thank you so much. Folks were totally enamored by your discussions and folks were celebrating what you were saying, but a few questions did stand out. So if you don't mind answering a couple of these with summaries, and if the story is already written, is it best to do an overall summary or break it down into seasonal summaries?
So when I do like both. So I do like the summary blurb, kind of like I said, which is like hey, this is exactly what the entire concept is like. I'm selling you on the concept. And then what they typically like to know is also like, hey, on the season breakdown, you have like 4 seasons. I will do a very simple paragraph on what that entire season looks like. I remember just the Goblin, I did like way a lot. But then for Samurai no Tora, I did like very simple paragraph. I'm talking like a quarter of a page, maybe less per season, which is like pretty hardcore condensed for what actually, you're condensing 50 episodes worth of content into like 100 words. So I'd say the season breakdown is typically what I do, but Eric, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So especially if you have a like really long and rich story, I think it's helpful to at least give us an idea of what you envision kind of being the seasons. Cause sometimes that's something that's a bit malleable, like maybe if we're really diving into it and you're breaking things down into like Webtoon episodes, you might find that what was season 1 might actually, be seasons 1 and 2, or conversely, seasons 1 and 2, you might be able to condense into a single season. And I think something also worth kind of being cognizant of is just because I think it's helpful to, even if you have like this kind of like big, really expansive story, letting us know like, hey, I can, if needed to, I can kind of tell this story like in a single season, just to give us an idea of like a gut check on like, hey, if you had to wrap up this in a single season, what would the story become in that sense? Because then it lets us know like how much you've been thinking about it, what kind of, malleable elements you have within your story. And again, that offers you some flexibility as we're kind of like, let's say you've gone through the process, you've pitched, you've gotten greenlit, and, we're into production on the first season. It's helpful to have those kind of key bits of information for us.
Thank you so much for elaborating. Brandon, you're a master at pacing your episodes. And a couple questions in the chat covered the fact that Canvas creators sometimes have to break up their episodes, at least their ideal episode, because of their production schedules on Canvas. So do you have any tips if you have to kind of break up an episode, what that pacing can look like for readers?
I've actually had to do this because I did a Canvas title called Kinfire. It's not under my name, but you can Fire First Expedition, and it would each episode is like the same length as like a Webtoon original episode, so it's like 50-60 panels. but we thought it would be we noticed a lot of Canvas titles like break up their stuff. So I was like, okay, why don't we just do that? Like within your episode, and this is typically how I write, there's like every single episode is kind of like beginning, rising up, you got the climax, and then it's kind of like downwinding. Within those like little like meadows, I guess you want to call them, are like more like uprising than those episodes. So typically I do breaks at places that feel naturally like they would almost be mini episodes within the episode. So almost like mini cliffhangers that are not like quite as strong as like a traditional episode cliffhanger, but you can find the right breaking points typically in a narrative, in a longer narrative episode, like where things feel like it would naturally break, I guess. But I never force a break. I'm never like, this episode has to be broken into five different parts. It's more like, oh, this feels natural, I'll break it there. Oh, this feels natural, I'll break it there. Yeah, I don't know. Eric, have you seen any really good examples? You probably are the Canvas master, so.
It's tough. I mean, like there's dozens of fantastic examples. I think breaking up an episode is the main thing you want people to feel is a sense of satisfaction from an episode. So I think if you're, whatever type of series you're telling, whatever type of story you're telling, Brandon, you mentioned this kind of like rise and then things dip down. It's like you want to have some form of tension. Usually you want your character to kind of like face some form of tension, and the tension can be escalated. There can be, they've reached some kind of resolution, but then again, like setting things up for the next episode, which is why kind of, we get into the conversation of hooks and cliffhangers and finding out, what type of hook or cliffhanger works best for you in that moment. Because it can be, if it's even within an action series, there's so many different options you can explore. It can be two characters about to face off. So then people are like, dang, I want to see how this fight goes. Or it can be something a bit more of an emotional beat. It can be a character asking someone a question that hopefully the readers have been wanting to know. So it's like, oh my goodness, I want to know the answer to this question. So I'm going to read the next episode. There's tons of ways you can kind of play with the information that you're telling someone. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like making sure that like you kind of feel satisfied and you feel like, oh, I've given enough so the readers can be satisfied, and wanting more still is, I think, one of the main things to try to aim for.
This is fantastic advice. Thank you both. Another question just for Brandon. I think folks are pretty inspired that you also post your ideas to Canvas. So they had a question. When it comes to ideas, would it be a great idea to test run as a one-shot and then try the full thing? Or do you launch fully into your stories?
I think it's a good idea. Testing with a one-shot is always solid. I think that's traditionally what they do in a lot of, in the manga industry in Japan, which is ultimately one-shots are to test not just your compatibility with an artist, it's also to test your concept and how it actually looks like on the page. And so I think one-shots are a great way to just test. It's also a good like narrative, exercise. Like if you can do really good one-shots, then you can tell a completed story that feels good in one chapter. And that's like a really hard skill to really adopt. And once you can do that, you can pretty much do the really strong episode 1 that we talked about. And that's really what that one shot experience kind of gives you, is like the ability to write a really strong episode 1. So I think there's really no downside other than if you're like hiring someone, like maybe it costs a little bit, to trying the episode, the one shot. But, from that one shot, you can also then take a lot of what worked and do that into your episode 1 if you decide to expand it. And you can also take out what didn't work. And when you do that, like little relaunch or expansion into like a broader series. And also if you didn't work with, well, super early. And so you can you don't have to go through the later process of being like, oh, I'm on episode 3 and this totally sucks. You find out pretty early. So.
Those are great tips. And for those who are asking questions about one-shots, Webtoon Canvas does have a short story section, genre that you can add your one-shots to. Brandon, there was another question that folks were just dying to know. What were your past manga and novel titles?
Oh, No. Okay. So
You
when
don't
I was
have
17,
to share. I get it.
no,
But
I'm joking.
folks are really curious
if you
about
Google
this.
my name, it's there, so it pops up. So it's not like a secret. So yeah, I wrote this novel called Age of Darkness. I was 14 years old when I started writing that. It started off on Wattpad, and then it went to publication. So so there, that was that. And then I wrote this one called God of War Ares, which is about Greek mythology. And then I wrote one called Ghost Wolf. And then yeah, Age of Darkness has 2 books. So those are my novels. My manga, there's a bunch of manga stuff out there. If you just like Google my name, there my website should come up, and all my links to my stuff are all there. But yeah, a lot of manga stuff, a lot of manga one shots, because I had to practice a lot just to get the first chapter like right, and to work into the genre kind of. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And for folks in the room, Wattpad is our partner app that is part of our creator ecosystem. So if you're interested in writing and publishing your story there too, know that it is a great place that also celebrates Webtoon creators. Eric, we actually had a question for you as well. There are some folks in the room who are part of school clubs, specifically one called Level Ground Comics, and they were wondering how you got involved with editing for Webtoon.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I actually come from, my background is a bit more initially oriented to writing and video production. So prior to working at Webtoon, I worked for this company, Legendary Digital, where we wrote and produced a bunch of very silly internet videos. But during that and all throughout my life, I've just been such a massive anime, manga, and animation fan, which of course drew me to Webtoon when I, saw them start to publish the types of works that I'd be interested in. So then when I was leaving that old job, I took, thankfully, I was able to take enough of the kind of experience I'd taken from those previous jobs, and honestly, just like the page Kirsten shared, there's the careers page. I checked it out. I read a bunch of Webtoons. I was like, I love stories. I would love the chance to help and work on other stories. And that was kind of my process and my kind of my journey into it. So yeah, I came from a slightly different background, but again, still a kind of like creative and writing background that brought me here. No novels though. I wasn't writing a novel at 14. Anything I wrote at 14 will never never be attributed to my name if you Google it, by design.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your origin story. Brandon, to touch upon your origin story just a little bit, do you have any advice that you would have given Brandon when he first started writing webcomics specifically? What would you have liked to know when you first started your journey?
I think when I first started just like writing in general, it's definitely the thing that I learned over the course of time is like that initial thing that I said is like trying too much. So like the 14-year-old thing that you were, that concept was so extravagant and so big, and it started off so big. I can't even, if I would try to make a log line of that story, I have no idea what it would be. And so because of that, that's the learning experience through all the novels is ultimately like, start small, go big. If I'm trying to bite off too much, and you can eventually go big, like over the course of like a long period of time. It's just like the initial like of introducing way too much at the get-go for readers is not only a challenge to do that feels natural and entertaining, it's also like it's just like really hard, and it's just like not that it's hard to make it interesting. I would say like it's too much information. If most writers probably are not having fun trying to cram all that information into a certain amount of panels, and it doesn't feel like it does it justice. So I learned that over the course of not just writing novels, but also one-shots. I have this one-shot called Icarus Rising, which the concept is meant for a longer series, but it's a one-shot. So I tried to bite off way too much. The art's crazy, but like I was like, dude, I slacked on that because I just did way too much concept. And so I think like the learning experience from there was like one-shots and like a lot of series, like start smaller and then as you get into it, like good examples like Just the Goblin and even Samurai no Tora, as you get into it, like you start to expand the world in a way that feels so natural. You expand the characters, you expand the cast. Like the worst thing is like if you were to start Webtoon episode 1 with 13 characters, because all 13 characters, everyone is just going to be at the same level of like, I have no idea who you are, right? So it's better to just like start off small and go big later.
Fantastic advice, truly. And we are at time, so I do want to take this time to close the workshop, but thank you sincerely. You shared amazing advice. Just like you mentioned, starting small, getting to know your characters, getting to know your world, Brandon. You are an expert at that. If you are not currently a fan of Brandon's, you will be when you check out his series on Webtoon Originals, Just a Goblin and Samurai no Tora. Thank you both for joining us today and sharing your expert insights. On behalf of everyone who attended, we are celebrating you. All
Awesome.
right.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.